Hello and welcome to Face the State. I'm Dennis Bragg and we're outdoors today. A beautiful day here in Glacier National Park, and I'm joined by Glacier Park Superintendent Jeff Mao. Jeff, a belated welcome to Montana.
Thank you.
It's all coming up not too long ago to a year.
Yes.
What's been your impressions of Montana, and especially this beautiful park that we have here?
Well, a lot of it for me is coming. It's almost like coming back to Montana, because I did spend 4 summers working in Southwest Montana, and I've had a brother that's lived in the state for quite some time. So, yeah, my year in Glacier, boy, it's been a whirlwind, and so much to see, so much to learn, process. I'd have to say, just seeing how concentrated and focused those 2 months of July and August are in terms of visitation and park operations is really pretty impressive.
Well, I think one thing people don't realize is when you work for the Park Service, one of the things you get assigned to a new park, you want to get out and see as much of it as possible. Have you had a chance to do that in among all the assignments you've had?
I've had the opportunity to get out and go for a few hikes and overnights in the park, and it's been terrific. But this is a huge place with over 700 miles of hiking trails, so I got a few more years to work on that. So.
I know what you mean. That's how it happens. Let's talk about your first summer here. You mentioned about the busy time that we have. It's July and August, very compressed, very busy in the park. Was that a surprise, or was that pretty much what you anticipated?
Well, I guess it was a little bit of a surprise in the sense of I really honestly didn't expect that on July 1st we'd still be plowing snow. But here we were, started April 1st, and we didn't get the road open till I think it was in the evening of July 2nd. So we pushed it down to the wire for the July 4th weekend, and then I think it was 2 months and a week we had to close the road again for the first snowfall. So
one of the things I'm always impressed with that road crew and how hard they work. That must have been something to watch them and watch that process up close and see what they go through in those weeks of hard work to get the road open.
Yeah, I had several opportunities to go up and be with the road crew, and always impressive with the skill and the nerve that they have up there, because sometimes they have to make that initial cut about 40 feet above the roadway, and they sort of calculate in their heads how they're going to end up on that center line, and they do it. I mean, it's amazing.
I'm always so amazed with those pictures, because it's a lot of parks have plowing operations to some extent, but when you see what they go through, that experience is just a key part of getting this road reopened, isn't it?
Absolutely. The fact that this road crosses, I think, almost 40 avalanche paths on the way to Logan Pass. You got to say, not sure we design a road quite like that now, but and luckily we only have one of those that we have to try to open up. So
let's talk a little bit about also this summer in particular. We still have a few weeks left here in the season, but it's been a busy one. And how are we doing in terms of trying to, looking close to a record here, and how are things shaping up so far?
September's been really, really nice weather so far. We've had a few little blips in terms of rainy weather or a little bit of snowfall, but generally speaking, it's been fair. So I think we're going to have pretty good figures for September, which will probably put us over the top of those 1983 figures. So,
talking about that a little bit, I know a lot of the parks, some of them, Yellowstone to some extent, certainly Yosemite, Olympic out on the coast, have these issues with lots of traffic, and here, like you said, it's more concentrated, especially on going to the sun in the summer months. Do you ever anticipate a point where traffic or those kinds of things will become kind of a challenge for us here, or are we in pretty good shape as far as the infrastructure and handling all those visitors? Well,
I think we already are challenged, and I think that's one of the reasons why we have our corridor management plan going for the Going to the Sun Road. That we want to take a look at that and try to get a sense whether that visitor experience is being diminished by the sort of wait times to get parking spaces and things like that. Just this weekend, I myself took my family up there, and it took me about 20 minutes hunting around to find a parking spot there at Logan Pass. But while it may be aggravating while it happens, boy, you go on a hike, you forget about that sort of small piece of aggravation as it could be. But, really is an incredible experience. But, we are concerned about that sort of overall visitor experience and trying to maintain that high quality. So,
what's kind of the timing of, because I know you're just kind of getting in the early stage of the corridor plan, what's sort of the timing that we're looking at on that process?
Well, we did some scoping meetings a year ago. We've gotten a lot of those comments back from the public, and from those comments, we're putting together some alternatives that, again, these are alternatives based on their comments and some ideas from us. We've had a lot of social scientists and natural scientists who are collecting data about the use of the road. We'll put all that together, put some alternatives out there, and go back out to the public and see what they think.
I know that we have, the red jammers just continue to be seems to be growing in popularity.
Right.
Might that kind of experience also, that's probably part of the equation that you're looking at, right?
Well, I think the red jammers are, will be incorporated as something that we don't want to lose track of, and so it'll continue to be, I think, one of the iconic experiences here at Glacier.
You talk about icons, I think of Glacier, and even before I moved back over to Montana, like you did, it's like it has this mystique, it has this attraction. What do you think it is about this park that really makes it such a, we talk about being the crown of continent and those types of things, but what makes this such a special park that people have come hundreds or thousands of miles to see?
It really is breathtaking scenery. I mean, people from around the world. In fact, I have an exchange student, and last Sunday he's from Bosnia. I mean, we took him to Hidden Lake, and he was it was clear. And he said, I've never seen anything like this in my life, and so I think the scenery has that power that goes with it. But it's also, I think, for a lot of people, and this is something I've learned this last year, is the connections they make with it based on tradition, that they may have first come up with their parents, and then later their kids come up, and just that sort of multi-generational connection that people have to this landscape, because it's so breathtaking. And you have those family experiences. They sort of make it all that much more transformational.
It really seems like it. I know, talking visitors, whether they're fairly much here in the Northwest or from around, that seems to be the one thing, and it's that striking scenery, I think, and the clarity of the water, and the height of the peaks. You can't, that is a really unique experience, and goes back, as we said, over 100 years.
Right,
now.
right.
Yeah. When you talk about the relationship too, and of course, I think we're so fortunate here in Montana to have Yellowstone and Glacier.
Right.
And they're different, and yet there's a lot of similarities with what they represent to the visitor. Talk a little bit about that relationship between the two parks, and do you guys get together from time to time and compare notes about how travel is going between the two? I mean, how do you look at that relationship?
That's we probably don't get together as often as we should. We sort of huddle up over particular issues of, perhaps visitation or particular species. We have the grizzly bear delisting is going to be coming up here in a little bit, but generally speaking, we get so busy in our own little worlds that it's usually in the fall and the spring, and the winter, we get an opportunity to sort of lift our heads up and confer back and forth and see how things are going. But just looking at visitation, I know that our visitation is tracking right along with Yellowstone's, so that what we're seeing isn't something unique to Glacier, but we know at least it's a regional increase that we're seeing.
That's one thing that's unique, is you see people a lot of times travel, and both parks will be on their itinerary.
Right.
If not, also Waterton and going north to Banff, and
right.
They really kind of, that chain of parks and that idea of going along this entire divide really rings true with the visitors, doesn't it?
Right.
What about the Canadian side of things a little bit? This relationship we have with Waterton, there's very few places, if any, in the world where you have that cross-border, the scientific, the ecosystems,
right.
The visitor trends. How do you tackle that and work with our Canadian neighbors that way?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you bring that up, because last weekend we celebrated the 82nd anniversary of the International Peace Park. Glacier and Waterton being the first international peace parks established in the world. And during that assembly, we actually learned from somebody who runs an NGO, a non-governmental organization out of Washington. He works specifically on peace parks. He said that there are about 120 transboundary conservation areas around the world.
That many now.
And of those, there are about 20 of them that fit the criteria for international peace parks, and in fact celebrate themselves as international peace parks. So that was just incredible moment to learn that how Glacier and Waterton sort of was the role model for what's becoming a ever increasing popular model for how countries can look at conservation, work across boundaries, and even maybe resolve some of their disputes for something greater. So
One of the things that we talk about the Canadian, and it brings to mind the issue of the North Fork and that special place up there. And having traveled on both sides of the border now, way deep under the North Fork, or as they call it, the Flathead Valley in BC and those areas. And, this proposal to maybe add on west of Waterton and protect the west side of that watershed. Of course, in Congress, there's the debate back and forth on the remaining oil and gas leases. But how do you, as the Glacier superintendent, kind of view that discussion that's going on about what happens up here in the North Fork?
Well, I think, as the superintendent of Glacier National Park, we look at sort of not just sort of the microcosm of Glacier National Park, but the entire bigger, larger landscape. And when you start looking at it, and for, over 2 decades now, we've had the Crown Managers Partnership looking at a much large area, region, everywhere from Banff to Missoula, to look at sort of what's connectivity for wildlife like, what are the issues of climate change that may be affecting us. It's hard not to look at that section there to the west of Waterton and say, wow, there's a hole there. Yeah. And so, when you look at it in that context, it shows up as kind of a missing piece.
Is that something that's on a particular part of your desk or in the to-do list or anything like that? Or is it one of those long-term things that takes place over a period of time?
It is a long-term thing, because really that's, obviously that's Canada's decision and British Columbia's interest in going down that path. And really that's for them to sort of work out amongst themselves. But when we talk to visitors, it's good for us to sort of, again, broaden people's perspective that some of the issues we have here at Glacier National Park are, symptomatic of a much larger issue across a broader landscape, and that, as time goes on, how all these pieces fit together, giving animals places to migrate and connect to new habitats, it's going to be important.
Because it is, the grizzly bears don't necessarily say, oh, there's the border, or there's the boundary, or I can't go on this land or can't go on that land.
Right.
You had talked about that delisting too. Do you see that as being sort of something that's going to be maybe a good test case of how we look at, in the broader sense of ecosystems and those kinds of things? Is that going to be interesting to watch that debate?
Yeah, I think it will be interesting. I mean, there's a lot of success stories out there where we have taken some, sometimes extreme measures to protect a species or bring it back from the brink. And it's actually worked well that we get to that spot where, maybe it doesn't need that level of protection. And I think everybody who's involved with the grizzly bear recognize that, the populations really have come back to a point where, maybe the levels of protection isn't as necessary as it has been.
And that gets back to the visitor experience too, where the education is the bears are out there,
right? Be
safe, and those kinds of things as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's talk about one of the things your predecessor, Chaz Cartwright, had talked about was, the wilderness designation question. And, parks have had this option for many years. I can remember Olympic did it way back in the early 80s. And the discussion was, let's even add a little bit, another layer of very specific protections for some of those really remote, untouched locations. In Olympic, it was an interesting thing because they did the designation, and now that's been 30 plus years since they did it. They ran into some interesting management issues, trying to do that, because in some ways, we have to be careful about how we replace a bridge or backcountry shelters or those kinds of things. Chaz Cartwright, had talked about that. There was some dialogue about that. Now you're in that office. How do you look at that question of whether this park needs wilderness designation?
Well, I think it's always a goal to get that wilderness designation. But, again, there's politics behind that. And I think, some of that's out of our hands. There's others who would say, there's other areas that are, it's maybe more pressing for them to get that wilderness designation because, we manage so much of the backcountry here at Glacier as wilderness. Yeah. So we manage it as if it's wilderness. So that gives it a lot of protection. But I think you're right about sort of the challenges we'll see with wilderness, especially in light of climate change. I think climate change is going to demand that we respond to it with different forms of adaptation, to maintain resilience, the resilience of a species to change and things like that. And we may find ourselves having to do some of that in wilderness. And that's going to, bring up a huge discussion, I think, amongst all of us, managers and the public, about, what are we balancing here, and how do we find that right balance?
One of the things that I think is unique about Glacier too, all parks have, you know, a scholarly approach in science and those things, but especially with climate change, you see articles about the research that's going on here. What happens to Glacier? Are we going to lose the namesake glaciers? Those types of things. How important is that science component when it comes to the future of Glacier?
Well, I think it's very important, but though, you know, I think the Park Service looks at responding to climate change in 4 ways, research being an important one, and of course here at Glacier we have the incredible research that USGS and Dan Fagry and his crew have done. But we also, you know, we have a bully pulpit here because of so many visitors that we see and talk to, so we can be communicating about climate change. It's important for us to mitigate and reduce our own footprint here as the National Park Service, as we learn how to become role models for that. And then finally, there's that adaptation piece. So, which I tend to focus on and look at as to, you know, what might we be doing differently as the National Park Service in the face of climate change.
And this one in particular, because we're right here at one of the main areas for the whole Columbia watershed, it's not just, well, here's this park in a corner, and it's like, you know, the water right here behind us is just as important to Idaho and Oregon and Washington and downstream. So that's a big part of that regional picture that you talk about there.
Yes. This area is often referred to as, you know, being the water tower of the West because of that. It represents the headwaters of some incredible river systems that go to the Pacific, that go to the Gulf of Mexico, and even go up to the Arctic.
Yeah, which I think is something a lot of people don't realize, is that triple divide approach is very unique. I can't think of another place in the continents it's like that off the top of my head, maybe somewhere in Canada or something. But let's talk about going to the sun. We talked about the highway earlier and the use. What about the rehab project and what's going on there? Now the work has shifted over to the east side. Give us kind of an update as to where we are in 2014 with that big multi-year project.
Well, a lot of the focus of this summer was on our section between Sayi Bend and Rising Sun. There's more work to be done on that through the rest of the fall and into next spring, but certainly by next spring we'll be continuing on the next section from Rising Sun to St. Mary. And hopefully by the end of next summer we'll be able to sort of wrap that up with you know, getting the pavement on the section all the way from Sayi Bend to St. Mary. And
so people understand too, just to catch up if they've not followed that, I mean, this has been a project that's been going on for, boy, I've lost track how many years.
Yeah,
at least six, 7 years, perhaps, something like that. And what was really the objective to work on that corridor there?
Well, I think it's the rehabilitation of the road. Is really sort of recognizing that there'd been a lot of deferred maintenance on it, and it really needed that sort of comprehensive rehabilitation to bring it up to standard and ensure its longevity for the long term. So.
And I know on the west side, a lot of that work was interesting because it wasn't just your typical rehab work. You had they had the historical components.
Right. And there's actually a little bit more work to do on the west. So in future years, I think 2 years out now, that we'll actually come back and address some of those areas between Apgar and Avalanche that we didn't actually get to when we started here on the west side.
One of my most memorable interviews is still talking to the fellow from, I believe it was Kalispell, and he was working on the wall up there at Triple Arches.
Right.
And I realized at one point he was roped up and I was just leaning over talking to him, and I thought maybe I should step back a little bit.
Yeah.
The work those contractors have done has been amazing up there, especially on the restoration of some of those historical features.
Absolutely. Yeah, they were. Yeah, their work is phenomenal. You know, we've come to trust them quite a bit in terms of you know, helping us get the roads open and things like that. So, you know, to be honest, when they leave and their job is done, it's going to, you know, all that road maintenance is going to fall back in our laps, and it's going to be a little bit different. We haven't had that for a while.
I know a lot of parks are struggling with, you know, and have been for several years, with infrastructure costs and budgets, and money's not as prevalent as it was, but visitation's still up. How are we doing just generally when it comes to campgrounds and other roads and facilities and things like that here in Glacier? Are we keeping pace, making a little headway? Could we always use a little more money?
I'd have to say we could always use a little more, in the sense of, you know, we actually generate a fair bit of funding through our fee receipts of people coming through the gates. A lot of people don't realize that we keep almost 80% of those funds, but the demands on those funds to rehabilitate bathrooms in campgrounds and work on, you know, rehabilitation of some of the, you know, the mini Glacier Hotel, and, you know, keep up with some of those things. It's, you know, the demand certainly outweighs the supply that's there. So.
And this park in particular, and Waterton as well, one of the unique things we have are those beautiful lodges, the history. What do you think that kind of represents when you look ahead into the future? I mean, we could look back 100 years and look at those lodges and what they represented and how they got visitors to be aware out here. How do you see that role of those kind of unique facilities, whether it's Lake McDonald Lodge or the Sperry Chalet? I mean, there's a real variety up there.
Yeah, and that's actually an area I think the Park Service specializes in, is in that sort of what is the legacy of the country and what is this representative of, and it's hard not to go in those hotels and stay there and sort of realize that, wow, people's expectations in those days were so different than they are today, because the emphasis wasn't on the room you sleep in, the emphasis was on the public areas. And so we, it's a good experience for people to sort of go there and say, oh, okay, it really was different how people thought about that. So, if we're successful, we can help people understand that, how this sort of transformation back in time and just how different people's thinking was in those days.
You talked about icons, and I think that's the one thing I get going in these lodges or Old Faithful Lodge, for any of those. You walk in there and you have this feeling of these people coming these great distances, usually by train to begin with and then early automobile, and coming these great distances to see these places. And it seems like that really helps you to understand the legacy that we have as well, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. And as I was learning earlier this week, the sort of as Montana's marketing, so much is focus is they're looking at what is it that puts people in an airplane to come to Montana. And they really said, Glacier's the motivation for why they come. And so, we need to make sure that we can deliver on that and ensure they have that sort of educational and a wonderful experience while they're here.
One of the things I found interesting was how, when the gas prices spiked, we got to $4 to $5 in some areas, over $5. And I know here, even during the Centennial year, the thought was, boy, is that going to cut the traffic? And it turned out people are still willing to, put it on the agenda and make that investment to come here. So you don't see that energy and those kind of things having much impact on visiting, do you?
No, not too much, though it does, sort of what we see as a spike now does seem to coincide with, the re-emerging economy. So, it's hard not to look at that. But, I do think, sort of access to Glacier and what that might look like in the future. Because again, you brought up the fact that so much of our history started with the railroads and how people enjoyed the park. We're taking these horse pack strings through the park, and that's a celebrated part of our history, but that was sort of overcome by the automobile and the building of the going to the sun, and that's become such a focal piece of the visit to Glacier National Park. And I like to sort of think about what's going to come after that. That we have a new generation where having a driver's license and owning a car may not be the most important thing in their life as it was perhaps for you and I when we were teens. And how do they want to visit the park? Because I think it'll be different.
I think it will, and it's interesting to watch all of the when we have the through bikers. People that I'm thinking to myself, okay, and I'm not in the shape to do that anymore, but I'm thinking, you're going to ride a bicycle over going the Sun Highway, and boy, it's a big thing for folks, and they really, that's part of that experience.
Right. We're finding that I think we're finding that a lot of our visitors want to be more active, even more so than just hiking and driving through the park. They want to engage. Paddle boarding out here on Lake McDonald has become increasingly popular. The kayaking out here continues to increase in popularity, and so. And bicycling for sure, and are we as bike friendly as we could be at Glacier National Parks?
One of the things too is we touch on this briefly, but the point of technology. It always seems like parks are always, there's something new. And I can remember back in the 80s calling up a park superintendent saying, okay, there's these things called mountain bikes. And there was that one year, I think it was like 86, where there was no policy. Nobody knew what to do. And then there was personal watercraft. And now it's drones. I mean, how do you kind of keep ahead of that curve? There's always something coming down the pike.
I'm not sure you could ever really keep ahead of it, but be thoughtful about that. Think about what is the goal? What is the park's goal? What kind of experience are they trying to offer, and how does this new technology either enhance it or make it detrimental to other visitors and their experiences.
And Glacier has done a great job too with that outreach online, because a lot of people, boy, you've got the Flickr account, you got the websites, you got multimedia. Is that an important part of that outreach to help people not only want to come here but plan for that change?
Oh, absolutely. I think, yeah, certainly, as we all experience, just in our own travels and planning for it, that we all use, how much we depend on the internet. And so, just sort of reflecting back on that and how we can, better serve our visitors in that way, so that they can make plans if they don't want to, wait so long, or they don't, they're looking for a place that's not so crowded, that they have options.
We have about 2 minutes left. I'm going to ask you to get your superintendent crystal ball out.
Yeah.
I think that passes from one superintendent to another, I believe.
Crystal ball or 8-ball?
Well, it could be either one. It could be either one. What do you see and what do you hope for the park over the next, say, 2 to 5 years? What's the one thing on your list that you say, boy, I really hope we can finish this one up or accomplish that project?
Well, I think, and having come from Alaska, where I felt that I learned so much in the face of climate change, and we're having to respond to it operationally, that I would like to sort of, show that, yes, Glacier National Park is being affected by climate change, but also that we can be a leader in terms of how we adapt to it, how we communicate about it, and, how we mitigate for it. So,
and especially reaching out to the rising generations to understand, because a lot of us won't live long enough to see maybe the benefits of those changes, but they can.
They will inherit that. And so, give them a good place to start.
All right. Well, Jeff, we certainly appreciate you coming by and or actually hosting us.
Yeah.
Usually we go to the studio and we're inside, and I want to thank your great public affairs person, Denise Gurman, for helping us put this together, and Dax Van Fossen for running his cameras. And thank you so much for hosting us here on the shores of beautiful Lake McDonald.
Yeah, I'm glad we could work it out. So,
and still a lot of nice weather to come here as we go through the fall. And we certainly, I guess, a personal invite out to everybody in Montana to come enjoy both the Yellowstone, but also, of course, Glacier National Park.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's one of those places that I think when you think about the future and what we have, it's certainly, like you said, it harkens back to the past, but also that future. Now, I want to mention too quick, Going to the Sun, we're still hoping to be open until October 19th, I believe is the date.
Yep, that's our goal, as long as we don't have one of those season-ending events.
Yeah, exactly, which could come at any time.
That's
up
right.
there. And we encourage folks to come out, and we have all kinds of events, and go to the website for all that type of information, and just come out and enjoy the park. And I guess it doesn't matter how you enjoy it, just come and experience Glacier, right?
Right. Yeah. And even in the winter, the number of local people that come up here in the wintertime and talk about their wonderful experiences. I think it's important that we sort of recognize that just because Going to the Sun Road is closed, that it doesn't mean that the park is closed.
No, that's why we used to call this the shoulder season, but more people are finding out beautiful days like this, they might as well come out and enjoy it.
Yeah,
that's for
our
sure.
fall weather has gotten really nice.
All right. Jeff, thank you so much for
bet.
spending some time with us. Best of luck to you and all the staff up here at Glacier National Park. Thanks for joining us for Face the State.